Hello, friends, and welcome to the Doing What Matters podcast. It's great to be back with you again this week. I'm your host, Teresa McCord.
And I'm your co host, Erica Vinson. We are absolutely thrilled that you're listening in today as we dive into discussions about life, business, and lots of things that truly matter.
So, here on the podcast, we really want to embrace a holistic approach to living, a way of life that's rooted in rest, not rush. It's about connecting to our real self, our real life, and our real work, and remembering who God uniquely created us to be and redefining success through a different lens.
Whether you're here to find inspiration, practical advice, or just a moment of connection, we're thankful you're here. Let's dive into today's conversation.
I am so excited about today's guests. Erica, why don't you introduce our guest today and we're going to get to the conversation.
Yes, Teresa, we are thrilled today to have best-selling authors Beth and Jeff McCord. They are the founders of Your Enneagram Coach. It's a community that offers a safe space for exploring a Christ-centered Enneagram. Their teachings help individuals and couples and groups achieve self-awareness and personal growth. And the McCords aim to help people see themselves clearly and really overcome self-condemnation, fear, and shame through the love and forgiveness of Christ. They've written 12 books and really offer some great experiential ways that you can engage through marriage experiences, Enneagram studies for couples in breaking unhealthy patterns and really aligning their marriages with the gospel. The McCords are joining us from Nashville, Tennessee. So welcome, Beth and Jeff.
Thanks for having us. We're so excited that this is finally happening.
I know I am so grateful. When she just said 12 books, I'm like, okay, I know I've read some of those. I do not think I have read all 12, but I think you have a book for each of the Enneagram types. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That took care of
That's 9 of them.
but if you don't know, I know many of our listening audience is very familiar with the Enneagram. For the first, I don't know, 90 or 100 episodes that I did, this podcast was actually all about the Enneagram. It was called the Enneagram in Your Real Life. And that's really all we talked about because the tool has been so impactful. And you started, Beth, I know, doing that work back then, 7, 8 years ago, whatever it was, that kind of your work started to come out into the world and connected with it so much because of the gospel centeredness of the tool that kind of no one else was doing at that time. And yeah, it was just great to have those resources and have those things to look through. But today, to be honest, I don't want to talk Enneagram, which sounds crazy. I know it will come up. I know the word will come out and
Sure,
we
yeah.
can't help it. But I really want to talk more to Beth and Jeff and just to the deeper parts of self. And we were talking before we hit record just about some of those things. And I've been sharing on the podcast my own journey of some different things that I've been walking through. And Erica's been great to sit with me as I just said, no, I'm not really ready to talk about sabbatical yet. I'm back. I'm still in the process of learning what I learned or what God had for me in it. But that's the first place I want to dive in because I know a lot of your audience and my audience both know that, Beth, you just took a sabbatical last year. And one of the things that I'd love is just to take us back a little bit to what prompted that. And as I was following you in social, you held up a book one time from Chuck DeGroat. And I'm like, okay, because I already had my sabbatical planned. And I'm like, I'm going to need to read that. And I did. And it was very impactful for me as well. If you haven't read his book, you'll definitely want to get it. We're actually going to study it in our community. Bring us in on the sabbatical story a little bit and where you were,
Yeah.
say, 6 months ago.
Actually, you have to go back even further. What got me to that? Honestly, it goes back to childhood. I'll get into that in just a second. A year prior to the sabbatical, both my parents, who were about 80 years old, fell. Different times, but close in proximity in time frame, like within a month or a couple weeks. Both of them didn't get seriously injured, but it was their wake-up call that they needed to move to Nashville. And during that time of getting them ready, my mom experienced several compression fractures in her back. which led to in and out of the hospital and rehab for about 40 days with me staying with her that whole time in Kansas City while packing them, selling their house all by myself because everyone else is here in Nashville family-wise. They were all holding down the fort with the business, which was amazing, and I'm full force caregiver, which was an honor to be able to do that. But I also knew at some point that's going to affect me. We went when we finally got them here and got them, took a while to get them settled in. Right after that, I had to go into book writing because I had a manuscript due. And so I spent about a month and a half with I have a team that helps me, and we spent a lot of time and effort finishing up that book manuscript. When I was finally done with that, we were headed into a big launch for our business, and I'm trying to prepare for all of those webinars because it was a new way of doing it. And my sweet husband decides to basically almost have a heart attack, and we find out that he needs quintuplet bypass surgery. So from a Saturday to Tuesday, he's in the hospital, and we learn that he needs bypass surgery, and he has bypass surgery. And then we're on a good month and a half of real recovery. Obviously, it's a lot longer than that, but real
And were
recovery.
you in Florida when that happened too?
We were in Florida when we were walking on the beach, and he was having a really hard time walking on the beach. He's a former football athlete. It's like, I'm walking fine. And he's 48 years old at the time. So it's,
Right.
I'm not thinking heart attack or anything,
Yeah.
but he literally basically was ready to have a heart attack. And so that was about 2 or 3, or like a week before we really found out what was
Okay.
going on. So that definitely was a aha moment looking back. Oh, that should have alerted us. But when you're that young, you're not really thinking in that direction. So we just feel very blessed that God gave us some warning signs that we decided to go ahead and go into the emergency room one day when he was having some issues, but it wasn't like anything super serious at the moment. And so he had the quintuplet bypass surgery, and he was then on the road to recovery. But I'm in caregiver mode
Again.
for a short period of time. Now with my mom, it was much longer because of her age and what was going on. Jeff, it was much shorter, but I was really probably struggling with some PTSD, thinking I'm going to have to be this caregiver for a long time. And then when he started within a week or two picking up his responsibility pieces where he could, it was like, wait, what? I don't have to do everything? But I could see that my body was in this kind of reaction mode. And so then fast forward, I just kept in that. I got to do everything, be responsible for everything. And then we've got adult children, and our daughter then had our first grandson that February after, so we're just in this really busy season. And I learned maybe 4 or 5 years ago that I have, as a good old type 9, a lot of codependent tendencies. And so those were really just kicking in, needing to be there for everyone, think about everyone, predict everything that needed to go on. And then you've got the business on top of that.
Can I offer another part that you carry that we've come to understand is for Beth to stay connected often meant at the expense of yourself. And that was managed by a very strong shaming inner critic.
Yeah. And that kind of goes back to the childhood part. So
Right.
the child
And the
part-
body type too of the dismissing of, there's all kinds of different language for it, but
Yeah.
the dismissing
can-
of the body, the 9 is the most
Yep.
of caring for self. So yeah,
Yeah, so-
I'm married to a 9 who
Oh, you are.
is a farmer, and I always say I have permission to talk about him, but he is dismissed as he breaks bones all the time because at even 66, he still thinks he can do things that his body just can't do. There's just a lot of times, and it's just that unawareness. I'm like, maybe it's time to not push yourself to that level. So,
Interesting about 9s is they get the kind of the stereotype of being lazy. And I'm like, actually, 9s
Not
can be
at
some
all.
of the busiest because they're
Yes.
so not focused. Now, maybe, yes, laziness, slothfulness of the knowing themselves and caring for themselves. You have to really watch out for them.
connection to the 3. We work a lot, Eric and I, in the Enneagram work we do with the harmony triads, and that connection to the 3.
Yep.
I think for 9s in their work environment, they don't go to the
Absolutely.
healthy side always.
And that's really then what started happening. You can see that I have all these big events happening within this 1 year period of time. But leading up to that, about 2 years before, Jeff and I were talking about our relationship in the car one day. And I was trying to explain to him like my inner world and how I was feeling and our relationship. And he just stopped and he just said very matter of factly, kindly, he just said, Beth, it sounds like you're married to a domestically abusive husband. And I instantly said, yeah. And then I was shocked that I even said that. And that alerted me to something else is going on. Like, why would I have said that? So all of that came to the forefront of realizing that I suffer from complex PTSD.
Mm.
And that comes from my childhood of having an older brother that teased me a lot. And parents, though, tried their best, tried to love us really well, neglected to stop him from teasing me. And as a good old 9, trying to people please, accommodate, be his best friend, but never being enough, never feeling important. So all of those things and the dynamics and the way that I would talk to myself because of that relationship early on in life, I carried into my relationship with everyone, but especially Jeff. And so really what I was saying at that moment was I was actually talking about my brother, not Jeff.
Right.
But I didn't know that. But I just knew the answer wasn't congruent with our relationship. But I was obviously reacting, being activated and triggered based off of past trauma. And that's when I started doing my own work.
One of the things you said in a podcast that I listened to where you talked with Chuck and talked through his book, and it was such a great phrase because I can relate to it so much in my own story, but was this idea that it wasn't this bad, horrible childhood. Sometimes when people hear about going back, which we do this with the tool of our life maps, the second map is about mapping out your life story and where it is and seeing the similarities and patterns and all of that. It's deep work. And sometimes people are like, I don't want to go back. I don't want. But what you said in the podcast was, it's 1,000 paper cuts. And I love that line, like all built up together because I grew up in Erica and I both very wonderful Christian, great parents and family. That's what I perceive. But yet, underneath that, and our many stories that create a story that we carry. So you're carrying this story and it finally needs to come out.
Yeah. So that story, that actually came out 2 years ago. And then this whole year of things that were going on. And then last spring, our business there's different things with the economy and stuff. So we were trying to figure things out and struggling. And I'm like doubling down on taking care of everything, like trying to control it all. That did not work. So come July, I got shingles at 49 years old. And that is just not something your body has or struggles with at that age, unless your body is at the end. So that was my kind of wake up call of, oh, I actually am really not treating my body and my whole being well. I needed a wake up call. And so we took that serious. And Jeff already knew that I was in a place that I really needed some time away. But like your husband, I'd have a broken bone. Who cares? Like, we got things to do.
We all can have that. We all cope in different ways. And
then we all have our big wake up calls. There's always little ones along the way. And we're like, oh, it's okay. But that was my big wake up call. And I just realized I need to take this serious. And met with Chuck DeGroat one time and we were trying to get his advice on how should I do this sabbatical. There's lots of ways that you can do a sabbatical. A lot of people have said, oh, did you have fun? And I'm like, I dug into my CPTSD story, trauma story, but I did learn a lot. I learned a lot. I spent about 4 hours a day doing inner work and inner understanding and working with a counselor. So on recovery meetings.
so is that sabbatical, right? Because it's interesting.
I didn't work at all. I was completely out of work, which on some levels was really great for the both of us. And at other times was hard. But I had no clue what was going on. And in fact, one day I saw like that Jeff had a webinar. I was like, oh, you guys have a webinar? And he's like, yeah, it's City Plank. And I was like, oh, wow, I had no idea.
Blankety blank, not covering up a curse word.
No, just like
Blankety blank webinar.
like we're doing this webinar that you haven't been a part of. And I've been a part of, I started the company myself. So
Yeah.
it was just so weird to be completely out of the loop. So in the mornings, I did a lot of inner work, and then I just basically didn't do anything in the afternoons unless it was like we went grocery shopping or this or that.
Yeah.
So that was really great and new and different. And I was going to do the sabbatical from basically August, September to the end of the year, but I needed to come back, I think in November, October, because of just the way the business needed.
I only
for me
did
to-
2 months, and I
Mhm.
don't know now on the other side of that, and I'm 3 weeks since I've been back. This week finally feels I'm at week 4 that I've gone through the cycle of everything you do again
Yeah.
that's on your kind of rhythms and routines, but you have to come like full circle to all the
Mm.
things that you let go of. One of the questions I asked the team when I came back is, what did you learn while I was
Mhm.
gone?
No, we talked about that. And I think for me, the fear of letting go sometimes, Beth, you were talking about the control aspect. And if you've built something and you are the face of the brand, or you are the coach, or you're the one that they've come to look toward, and it's, can I step away and do I trust that it'll still be there when I
Mhm.
return? That was something I learned, was that, yes, like it's our God given right to rest, and the Lord has it. And it's good to rely on and collaborate with others.
Yeah.
I will ask you this, since you've been back, what are there rhythms or routines or things that you've tried to put into place to do different? Like, what's the action from that experience? Because I'm still
Yeah.
trying to figure that out. So if you can tell me,
Here, let me tell you how it goes. For like,
because you're a little ahead of me on the journey.
Look, this is we're launching our next book on this podcast.
Yeah.
no, because I had to come back in some ways suddenly. The unfortunate thing about that is I had planned on having several weeks to think through and process what is my role going to look like in the future, but that got dramatically changed, and I needed to come back in and how I felt in
Mhm.
my probably typical brain. Oh, we got to do all these things, and I got to, and because we have the holiday sale coming up and all the things in a smaller team. So what we recognized was I went straight into past behaviors, partly because it needed to happen, and partly just because I hadn't had the time or the space to think what is this going to look like? How is this going to be different? So we started seeing old patterns quickly come back up. And I just realized, okay, I'm going to do what needs to happen in the moment, but I really need to get back into a more balanced, structured life. And so once that was passed, I really just went back to some of the rhythms and routines I had during sabbatical, which is getting up every day. I listened to some affirmations, again, because of that vicious inner critic from CPTSD. I needed to retrain my mind. So having positive affirmations, especially in the early morning hours, I guess your brain waves are like more absorbing things. So just
Yes.
really capitalizing that. And then I just read. So we both, Jeff and I, now he's been attending for 9 years, me just several months, but Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families is a 12-step program for kids who grew up with alcoholics or dysfunctional families. And mine was a dysfunctional family. But there's so much good that's there. And so every day I read the daily reading and unpack that. And then I usually have some other book to read. Like I've been reading Pete Walker's Complex PTSD book, and some other books on the side to help me to stay focused on my own recovery. That it's like Jeff said, when I was jumped right back in and I was struggling, he just really reminded me, Beth, recovery is one day at a time, and it's forever. This isn't just you did a little bit of recovery and everything's good now. And what was this line? If you don't,
Yeah, whatever you put in front of recovery, you lose everything you put in front of recovery, but you gain everything if you put recovery first. Something like that.
yeah, something like that. And I realized, oh, you're right. I was really getting sucked back into the old patterns. And so I took it upon myself that every morning I'm going to get up, I'm going to do, even if it's just a few readings a morning, get my mind somewhat as best I can in the right groove. That doesn't mean I'm not going to have moments of dysregulation or everything like that. But if I can get myself set on the right path and understand where I've come from, what I've struggled with, and that I still need healing, then it gives me the flexibility to care for myself more than I would have in the past.
And thank you for using the word recovery. You may or may not know a little bit of mine, but we lost our son in 2017 to addiction. And that to me was that season was me doing my own work
Mm-hmm.
of what am I using as the coping behavior. And for me, it was work. And I lean into that heavily with my Enneagram 3 anyway, but it was the affirmation. And I do go back on my story and say, where did I get that from? The way my parents would affirm me was farmer, dad, teacher, mom. It was work. And a lot of shame stories, a lot of growing up in the shadows of my mother and my brother and all of those things. And so I just performed, right? And so Eric's story, my son Eric's story and his struggles and all of those things. And Eric and I both were very involved in recovery work programs in that, which also look at story if you really get down to the harder
Absolutely.
part. But I think sometimes we're afraid of that word. It's been so put with drugs and alcohol and sober
Exactly.
and recovery and all of this. And yeah, don't
And
be
there's lots of recovery groups. I mean,
absolutely for everything,
there's-
anything.
there's codependency.
Yep.
My choice of addiction is codependency. It's,
Mhm.
oh, what can I do for you? How can I be accommodating and flexible and helpful and make you happy? Thinking that's going to bring me life and other people's life. But that ultimately just runs me into the ground, gets me irritated, and actually self-sabotages. Yeah, recovery looks, like a lot of different things. And then just
does.
recovery from how I was treated growing up. But I'll be honest, I think the hardest thing, and you brought this up, the hardest thing for me to get from where I was into recovery was admitting or seeing the fact that my family wasn't perfect, because that was the rule, right? We're a great family. We're a Christian family. We're wonderful people. We're loving people. Or it wasn't that bad. Or people have it so much worse than.
Yes.
And that negates our own experience and our own perspective as children, and the trauma, whether little or a lot, that we experience, that we had to use our own defensive mechanisms and strategies to survive. It minimizes all of that, and it keeps us then away from recovery versus. That doesn't mean you have to I don't have to say, oh, my parents were the worst parents. They
No.
really tried.
Absolutely.
And they did some really amazing things. And they unfortunately did not, and they've even since apologized, thankfully, they did not put an end to how my brother was treating me the way they know that they should have. They just didn't have the tools and the resources at the time to know how to do it and do it well. So I can now say, this is what happened. This is the family I grew up in. They loved me the best they could, and I love them, but I have recovery work that I have to do.
Mhm.
Yeah, thanks for your transparency, Beth, because I think, and one of the things I learned as Eric was walking his story, Teresa's son, is that relapse is a part of recovery. And you described for us several different wake-up calls. And I love the phrase you said, and I went into reaction mode. And that is our human tendency so often. And yet when you offered and took the space to say, okay, and then I started to do my own work, the story shifts to where there is a recognition and a response. And it's not perfect, like you said, but it sounds like grace. And so what has it been like for you even to go, okay, yes, the relapse is a part of this recovery story that I'm walking. It's walking, the ing matters, the side of heaven. We're always healing, we're recovering. What a difference has it made for you to be able to experience that? I can recognize and respond now instead of just reaction mode.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that's been two of the biggest things that have been helpful with recovering well. First is the gospel, that
Mhm.
I no longer have to have shame and self-condemnation and fear, but I can experience the love and the forgiveness and the wholeness of my identity in Christ, that I am seen and loved for exactly who I am in all of it. And I can rest in that. And it's based off of what he's done versus me. The second is really having Jeff gone really 9 years ahead of me in the recovery process. And so when I'm, dysregulate because I'm still just learning. I'm like on training wheels, so to speak.
Yeah.
And when I get
Mhm.
dysregulated, he can more quickly see it. He understands it. He's already been there, been through it. And so he can give me some insights or just listen. And we're still figuring it all out. But I'm much more apt to hear the truth because there's safety knowing that I'm okay. Whereas my quote unquote addict mind, my codependency mind, felt no, I have to be the most helpful, the most accommodating, the best wife. I have to make him happy. I have to make everyone happy, make my kids happy. And yeah, obviously that's impossible. But a type 9, we're convinced we can do it.
Oh, yeah. And when I was walking it with my son, that was part of the 7-year journey we had with him of I wanted to control it all. And that letting go, the work that God did in me in that story for my husband and I both to let go, to ask him to leave our home, to ask him to leave our farm, to all of those things that are hard things. And yet we're trying to show up to go to work and pastor others or be with. And yet underneath, it's just Eric and I walked through a lot of ministry life together where we were both in crisis.
Ministry?
It is. It is. You're
I
absolutely
mean,
right.
and I think honestly, that's what's wrong with American Christianity.
And so both of us had to go out and seek our own journeys and our own work and our own coaching and therapy and counseling and all the things
Yep.
because he didn't know what to do with us. And that wasn't no blame, no shame. It was just the season that we were in. And as you were describing like this and then this, oh, I so get it. I remember. And for some people, that's never ending. Praise God that sometimes it lets off the gas a little bit
Yeah.
and you are on to the next thing. But we could spend all time talking about the sabbatical stuff and all of that. I knew we could, but I don't have it figured out yet. And I told
Yeah,
Erica that on the
me neither.
first podcast that I came back from, and I had this grand plan. And I had a really good friend say to me, and you mentioned it, if we go back. So, what was I going to do on sabbatical? And it's not about doing anything. And he just kept reminding me of that. You know what the benefits are or why you went right away when you come out of sabbatical. I really don't know.
There's a great line in recovery that, and you can put whatever adjective you want in here, but if it's not messy, you're not doing it right.
That's never true.
Or if you're not scared,
Mhm.
you're not doing it right because that is part of the recovering process is that you're walking. And I think it's Isaiah 50. It says that let him who walks in the dark, who has no light, trust in the name of the Lord is God. But those of you who light fires for yourself and set flames ablaze, this is what you'll receive from a hand you'll lie down in torment. Meaning, our experience is much like walking in the dark and trusting, but it's when we choose avenues of control or rely on our giftingness to somehow control life to make it work, where we only trust in our own capacities and defensive mechanisms that we actually creates more torment.
That's so good, Jeff, because a lot of the work that we do is helping people create what I call a modern day rule of life. What does this look like for you? We have a process that I created after I had to do that. I literally had to start over and say, how can I survive all these things that just kept happening one after another? Our son's story being part of that, our ministry work, lots of different things. And we call it the real life process. We call it real life because real life is always messy. And so when people come through it, they're like, they want the nice, neat little, oh, I read the book. Now I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And I'm like, this is your real life. You're creating some framework and you need some spiritual practices underneath that. And this is where we really use the tool of the Enneagram because it's in this real self part, the knowing of yourself we think it's the best tool for that work. But then after that, you got to go back out into life and live it out in your everyday life. Romans 12:1-2 is my take your life and go live it. But yeah, it's always going to be messy.
Yeah.
There's always going to be stuff. So speaking of messy, let's talk a little bit about what you brought up, Beth, because I want to stay with our stories of Jeff, this health journey Beth just shared, like in the middle of all that, and you had some heart stuff that went on. And can you just share a little bit about even as you had to step away and probably realign some things, what came up for you in all of that? Because that's a whole nother journey in itself to go to that level of almost to your knees of, okay, my body's not functioning.
Yeah, I mean, it is story work. It is related to my story. So I have always had ambivalence towards my body.
Mhm.
And I was adopted. I was born to a woman. Her name was Patty, and she was Mexican. She too was adopted. And then my biological father was Cherokee Indian and English. I believe his father was actually born in the Cherokee Nations in Oklahoma. But I was adopted by Johnny and Gerald McCord, as redneck Texan as you could get. I was different than them. Now, this is back in the 70s. This is before adoption was popular, churches were on board, and resources were rampant. Plus, my parents have their own stories of trauma and neglect and abandonment. My mom's story was tragic, and that's why she couldn't have children, was in light of some of the family stuff and but also abuse. I never knew exactly who I was. And what fundamentally led to all of this is the fact that a lot of the diseases commonly associated with some minority populations were part of my story. I just didn't recognize it or live with it. And so, really, what precipitated all this was I'm type 2 diabetic. And,
But did
but I didn't know of, I didn't have a medical history. It's like I just spontaneously came out of nowhere. And so I can't say this comes from this comes from this. In the hospital. So when I was 30, Beth, we were married at the time, but we found my biological mother, and I met two half sisters. I would later meet a full sister. She was reluctant to meet me at first, but she was a little older than I was. But lo and behold, my biological father had died in 2020 of heart disease. My biological sister is diabetic, also had bypass surgery a year or two ago. Is that right?
but we found this out in the hospital.
After the surgery. So the one is I didn't have a great relationship with my body because I always had ambivalence towards who am I, what am I. I knew that I had certain abilities because I was strong, I was fast, I was became a Division I athlete. So there was certain giftedness to it. But there was a certain, honestly, with all of the tragedy that was around me, a degree of sadness, and a lot of that accompanied food. And what that meant was my mom struggled with some congenital illnesses and this is my adoptive mom, spent 1 to 3 weeks every year in the hospital. And so that would mean a week being bedridden, a week in the hospital, a week of recovery. So that's what my childhood was like. And with my dad working and trying to take care of me, trying to take care of her, we ate out a lot. And that just established patterns that would eventually catch up with me. But I will say, like, I had to apologize to my family after this happened because I recognized that I wasn't suicidal, but I certainly didn't enjoy life. And it was a slow way of deadening desire and killing myself. And even after the surgery, I had to answer the question because there's been a lot of progress since that time. And my life is radically different. And that's not the case for a lot of people who go through that at my age. Now, I had the benefit, I was 48, I'm not 65 doing this. I had the luxury of having a younger body to respond. But we talk about this, like I never had an infection. Every medication did what it was supposed to do. And as I changed my lifestyle, my body responded the way that it should. There were no complications in that. So I started walking. Guess what? The walking helped. I was
Yeah, he
off.
walks like almost every day for 4 miles.
Yeah.
So I was off insulin within 3 months because my body responded when I started eating better and exercising. And that's not true for everybody.
Right.
But all of that came out of a choice to live and not live out of the sorrow of one thread of my story, but to live out a different story.
Yeah.
But I still have reminders. I've got a 8-inch scar on my chest. I see it every morning and it just stares at me. I think I take more supplements now than I actually do medications, but I
Right.
take a lot of
You've
pills.
switched over to the natural side.
That's right.
See,
And,
you
but,
do the whole meal.
You
it
know that
still,
anyone who listens to this is going to go, Jeff, can I have your supplement regimen? That's what we ask each other.
Sure. I need a network marketing.
You need
business
an
'cause,
affiliate link for
So true.
but I will say walking for this Enneagram 6 has been probably the biggest contributing factor to my physical recovery after that.
Well,
Cause
physical and emotional.
that's right. Cause it has opened up so much for me. I don't carry the same kind of anxiety. It's almost like I'm letting the anxiety go with each step, letting all of the hormones and all the racing thoughts in the morning
And when you don't, you do see a difference.
I do see a difference. I do see a difference.
So I want to go there for just a minute because
Yeah.
I'm going to let Erica go there because I know her story. You all don't, but I do. And I know how much as a fellow, what did we say earlier? 60,
Yes.
60.
Our sixiness. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
As a fellow 60ness person, although Jeff, do you move to more of that counter type in that?
To be honest with you, I think it's a part of just body stuff. My facial expressions and brows and all that stuff. I can have a very strong presence. I can lose affect when I'm thinking. And there's a sense to where I grew up realizing I can intimidate my way and let that lead. So I
and
can
with
cover
your
up my
physical
anxiety.
presence and your
That's right.
physical ability and all of this. But I'm going to let Erica go. And then I want to come back around a little bit to your adoption story because we have that in common as well. Both of my children are adopted.
Okay.
And my daughter from Romania, my son was from here in the States. So I want to come back to that for a minute. But Erica, I know you were going, oh my gosh, walking.
Yeah, whether it's residing in that headspace as a 6, whether it is physically getting in my body and walking, and I, like you, Jeff, have done a lot of steps. And sometimes it's me picking up a pen and physically writing and realizing that's exercise for me as well. But it has helped me to untangle my thoughts. It's helped me to know what my heart feels. It helps me to become awake and alive. And I think often about that passage from Luke 17 when Jesus heals the lepers. And there's this part of the passage that says, and as they went, they were healed. And like healing doesn't come as we stay, it comes as we go. And so it has inspired me so often to go, okay, you're feeling overwhelmed by your thoughts, or you're not sure what clarity you have here. Okay, get up and move and get up and be generous, get up and serve someone else. Or it just really has been a huge part of my journey. So I definitely resemble that remark as you were sharing just about the journey of walking for you. And I love the phrase you use about my choice to live. That is powerful.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about getting outside for me. I don't know if it's because I saw a TikTok of someone sharing about getting sunlight. I don't know what it was, but
All the vitamin
I-
D that we need, you know.
yeah, it was recently 13 degrees outside and I can go the most amount of clothing, the least amount of clothing to get around my neighborhood, but I'm going to get outside and do this. Now I have slipped on ice, which wasn't smart. I've been caught in the rain. Yeah. But there is something about getting outside that I love your phrase, get into my body, which it sounds a little strange. How can you get into a place you're already in? But as a 6, I am just always thinking and all circling. That's like, how do you remember all your tasks without writing them down? Because I ruminate on them.
The hamster in the head is what Erica used to always say. Oh, the hamster's on the wheel and it's just running inside the head. And yeah. So yeah, thanks for sharing just the journey and where you are now. And praise God that you are in a different place. And so much came from that. And we won't stay there long, but yeah, just that connection to, and that was an aha for me, even that I look forward to sharing with my daughter she's a type 5 on the Enneagram. Again, very much in her head and reconnected with, I write about it a little bit in my book, but while our son was in the midst of his in and out of recoveries and all the things he was doing, my daughter found her birth family in Romania.
Oh, wow.
We made a trip back during that time in her freshman year, and she's been back again since she got married. That was important for her to reconnect her husband to that space and place. But you said some things there that I want to go back and listen to, just even about the body space connection and all
You know,
the.
Teresa,
Thank you.
it's interesting about finding my biological parents. It happened very quickly because it was done through an agency.
Mm.
And I had the benefit of having a social worker mediate the relationship. So it didn't happen immediately. But I will say it actually added a degree of sadness. It answered a lot of questions.
Mhm.
And I have a little pocket rosary that Patty used to pray for me, that the fact that she was mindful of me all these years. I can't imagine, because at that point I had finished a master's degree. I can't imagine she would have ever dreamed that her child that she gave up would have done that. But when she first got the letter from the agency, it brought tears to her eyes because she had never told her family, nor her present husband,
Mm.
nor her daughters that she had ever given a child up for adoption. So I was the reminder of a very dark and lonely season for her.
Yeah.
And my sister was very reluctant to meet me. It was interesting. The social worker told me, be careful because you could develop romantic feelings for her because you might connect with her in ways that you've never connected with another person because she's
Interesting.
related to you. And I thought, oh, that,
Okay, that's
it's
what's
going to fall on my sister.
And Annika shares her story, so I can share her story. But yeah, she has 3 siblings in Romania and has met them. And it was uncanny. Like she looks exactly like her sister. We
Even
have
my
our little,
dad said when we went to my mom's house, he said, "Damn, son, you really are Mexican."
and it's interesting. You were talking about the body space. So when our daughter was little, so yes, from Romania, when our daughter was little, she's so physical. She was a little gymnast, a little Romanian gymnast, like all of the, just so typical. And now that our grandson is, and boy, not a girl, but I'm like identical look to. So
Wow.
it's very interesting because Annika was 2.5 when we brought her home. So we don't have baby pictures. We don't have,
Yeah.
those first. So when you look at our little grandson, it's seeing, and even for her, it's like seeing we have 2 baby pictures that her birth mom gave us when we went. So there's a whole thread to our stories. And then I have my son who never met his birth family. And yet, and I'm being very transparent, but who I feel like someday there will be a family that will come and I will have to share that he's not here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's both sides of every story, but that part that is our childhood that we need to reconnect the threads, whether it's in what you shared, Beth, of had great families, had all of this, but yet there was all these little paper cuts, or Jeff sharing, I had this heart attack, but where does it go back to? And what did God even give me as a gift through some of those things? So I think the more and more we learn about this deep work that we all do, the more we see the whole entire thread of our stories coming through. So I have one more place if we can go there real quick. I know you guys are on a timeline and the baby is sleeping. That's the timeline we're really on, right?
Right.
A little lighter, but yet deep, because I just trusted as we came to this podcast that you guys would go there with me. And I think it's just so good for people to hear from real everyday people, but yet people that they admire and have followed and looked up to, that they have these real threads of story. But let's talk a little bit about business. I have a lot of people that listen in that are entrepreneurs like yourselves and business owners and leading teams and dealing with the economy and what's moving today and what's not moving tomorrow and all the things that we do. And I got to hear you all speak about a year ago at an event, and you were very transparent there, even of this journey of the business of the Enneagram Coach. And I know, Beth, that you started the company and did that. And I'm not sure, Jeff, in that timeline, I think you were still pastor at the time, if I'm right. And
No, we had left. We had moved here for a church and then left that church after a year,
remember that.
and we decided not to move. She had gotten a job with Michael Hyatt and Company at the time. Now it's
That's
Full
right. I'd
Focus.
forgotten that piece of the story. Yeah.
And their company and leadership were so kind to say, yeah, whatever you want, go start it.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, this is a little behind the scenes. Ian Cron was riding the road back to you and
Yes, I
Michael's
was gonna
marriage
say,
house while
that
Beth
was
was
exactly
working
how
as
it
their
was.
assistant.
By the way, shout out to, we have a very dear mutual friend, Karen Anderson.
So that's the other funny story. So then Ian wrote his second book on the Enneagram in her cottage. Literally, he moved out the next day we moved in while we were building this house. And we wrote our second book on the Enneagram, More Than Your Number.
She's great. But when you think about the business and just where it's gone, and you shared at that conference the explosion, literally, of the business. And
Yeah.
you were just these two little people doing this thing. And then all of a sudden, it's a whole different level. And some of the trials and errors and hard stuff that brought.
Even more interesting because with the economy shifting and the Enneagram had its like trend and it really peaked up in 2019. It hovered up there, but then around 2022, it's not that it's come back down to about where Myers-Briggs is. So it's still doing great things, but it's not where it was. And when we started the company in 2016, it was the fall of 2016 when The Road Back to You came out. So basically what I tell people, it was like I started the business and it's like being a surfer and you're on the surfboard and you're like going out, getting ready for a wave.
Hoping for a wave because
hoping-
the seas are totally calm.
Hoping there'll be a wave, and you're learning all the things and maybe a wave will come and we can catch that wave and
Pay
slow-
for our son's college.
Yeah.
That would be a dream.
So we got out there and just waiting for the wave. And then The Road Back to You came out and then the tsunami wave came. And we rode the tsunami for a good couple years, which is a blessing. And you've got two people that were basically just in minute. Like I was a stay-at-home mom and the church secretary forever. And then till I worked for Michael Hyatt part-time. That was my life. And literally it being a tsunami is what it felt like. I am writing something I have no business writing. By God's grace, he navigated it. He gave us a lot of people around us that were supportive, willing to help when we had the resources to pay for them to be employees. As we rode that wave, and then over time, when you build, let's say a building that holds 50 employees, that's not how many we have, but like I say, you build a building and you hold 50 employees, but then all of a sudden there's less interest and now you only need 25, but you got a building for 50. It's, what do we do? So since then, we've had to readjust and rethink and restructure, and that's been just as challenging to figure out, okay, where are we now? What have we committed ourselves to that we need to fulfill at a team that's smaller? And so that
you're in
has
a
had
different
its own-
season in your lives too.
Yep,
That was some of
very.
my sabbatical work. Like even our own desires and longings. It's one of
Yeah.
the MAPS titles that we do. It's desires and longings. I'm like, that shifts and change. And I think some people look at a company like yours and say, this is what they always do. And this is what they'll always be doing. And this is,
Right.
and yet we're doing our own work along the
Yeah.
way.
And I think that's the beauty of, again, ministry or work is if we're willing to be vulnerable and authentic, it will be its own thing and people will also follow, not because we're great, but because we're authentic, because we're real. And that's what they're looking for, not so much a role model to exactly follow. I think we all wish there was this perfect role model. And that's the unfortunate thing when you then have your leaders fall, right? Because you thought you were following this invincible person, when really we just need to follow people that are willing to be honest and authentic and vulnerable that, hey, I don't have it all together, but I'm willing to do the work day in and day out.
It makes I'm reminded a lot of my pastoral counseling training was with Dan Allender, and the way that he spoke of church related trauma is that when we experience betrayal of any kind, we experience fragmentation where we lose ourselves to the parts of ourselves to manage. And so we will look to dogma to give us hope, to give us an enemy and something to fight with. Oh, you're giving me certainty rather than suffering. And I think for us, I think that the hardest thing for Beth and I is that we feel like Moses. Like, why would you choose? I'm a stutterer. Why are you choosing me? Why are you sending me? Don't send me anywhere unless you're going to go with
I had
me.
a reading disability, and then God's, you know what, you're going to write 12 books. And
But
I'm
you're
like,
going to have to read multiple times.
excuse me.
And so there's another phrase that we use. It was first said about marriage when I first heard it, but it's true for our businesses as well. But that our businesses are opportunities to practice our recovery.
Mm,
So
absolutely.
what? And another little anecdotal story, but I believe it's true. There's a botanical gardens in Nashville, and I went to a silent retreat there one day. And we'd spent the morning walking the grounds. It was beautiful, silent retreat and just walking. But some people had managed to find themselves in a building where there was an art display. And what this display were these little, maybe the size of the palm of your hand, pots and clay pots. And what this guy did was he would put a firework in the middle of the pot, light it, let it explode, and then he would fire the pots. And the chemicals would react with the clay in different ways with different fireworks. And so the display was 100 of these pots. Everybody ended up that afternoon realizing like, oh, God may not only be the one who promises to restore me, but he's also the one who promises to disturb me. He is so ruthless for our hearts. He'll blow stuff up to get our attention.
Absolutely.
But there's always beauty to it.
Mm.
I can't remember the song, but there's beauty in the breakdown. If I can accept the business on real life terms for what it is and not an expression of my whatever, we could walk the wheel on how each type could over-identify with their business, right? But accept the business that it's not my value, it's not my worth, it's not my identity. But I certainly have a gift to steward. It can become an opportunity for our own healing, but it is hard. Unless a seed falls to the ground and dies, it can't bear fruit. The key is not getting up, it's staying down and waiting.
Staying humble.
Wow. Yeah. It sounds like surrender. And it reminds me of Job. When he has tested me and tried me, I will come forth as gold. And as you're describing this tsunami, and those are those moments where sometimes we don't even see it coming. And yet every day we can imagine ourselves being on the beach. The waves come, but there is a turning. We can stand with our back toward and it just smacks us and we lose our footing. And as you were talking, it's almost like you're turning toward the wave and noticing, okay, I know this is coming. I might go down. I might need help, whatever it is, but what a beautiful way of just being authentic and modeling for others that it's not about, like you said, Jeff, it's not, we're going to fall.
I want to ask this question. Any place I've ever interacted with you guys, you're always willing to share the story. And I think it's helpful for people to hear. And I know there's people out there going, I wish God would send me a tsunami. I'm ready for the tsunami. Send it over. As we train coaches, just like y'all do, to do this work and be in the world. But that piece that, do you really want the tsunami? Because it's hard.
It's hard.
It's difficult. And it's difficult on both ends. So how do we sit in that place as doing the work God's called us to do and be grateful for whatever he's sending to us, whether it's there is no waves. And so how do I sit with that? So what you said, Jeff, about if we went back to the Enneagram and went around the whole thing, I am not my business. And I am not the work that I'm doing. That this is so much a part of my work is God loves me no matter what I produce or what I do. And I remember sitting with that even after Eric passed and saying, what do I do with this? Where am I in this place? And just allowing him to sit in that place of rest and say, could you do nothing? I'll love you anyway. And that's the gospel story is he's going to love us anyway, at the lowest of lows, at the highest of highs, I love the transparency and the hard, even of the work you've done with the Enneagram, which has been a controversial tool. We all know that. Eric and I walked that story too. So that's for another conversation for another day. One final thing. What are you excited for next?
Gosh, that's a great question.
I'll be honest with you. I feel like I'm in the place of waiting because I don't know what's next. So we rode the wave. We've trained thousands of coaches. We published all these books. And now as things have calmed down and we're trying to figure out, okay, what does it look like now? I think we're trying to figure it out.
I think right now I guess what's hitting me in my type 9 gut reaction is that it is a one day at a time, that it's not so much
That's what we're excited about.
yeah, it's not so much I need something way ahead, because they're really, not to say that there isn't things ahead.
Well,
Some days are going to be amazing and some days are going to really stink. And that's part of all of it.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Beth, because what really strikes me to give me joy is the fact that we're both waiting and anticipating. There is anticipation to it, but the fact that we're not going to try to generate something. I remember Pastor saying, what starts in the flesh must be sustained in the flesh, but what starts in the spirit is sustained by the spirit. And so the fact that you and I both have the same approach to this season of our life,
right.
that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah.
I don't know what the business is going to look like, and I
Doing
don't know
it
what the Enneagram's
together.
going to be,
We're
but
doing it together.
we'll be
Yeah, that's true excitement. This has been so rich, so full, because you guys have been so awesome to just be with us and be transparent. I'm just grateful to connect. And in some ways, I'll be on the journey together. So thank
Absolutely.
you
Thanks
for
for having
that.
Yeah, thanks for creating the space for it. We don't
Yeah.
get to talk about this stuff a lot, so
Mm.
really grateful for it.
You can talk about the Enneagram all the time, but to talk about your stories is a lot more fun. So
Absolutely. It's such a joy. And if people want to connect with you, what's the best way they can find you?
YourEnneagramCoach.com has all the things, free assessment, our resources, trainings, etc. But also on Instagram at Your Enneagram Coach.
we have people in our own community that have been trained by you and use your tools, but it's the ordinary moments that really make a difference. I've been doing these posts for almost 2,400 days every day on Facebook to just say, what is there, God, that you've given me today? That's an extraordinary moment. And anytime I get to be on the podcast with Erica or be with guests like yourself, it's a great day. So we'll end this way. Every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment. You just have to look for them. We'll be back next week with more of the Doing What Matters podcast. Thank you, friends.